Okay, can you say and spell your name for me?
Yeah, my name is Mark Person. Last name is spelled Person.
All right, and what's your title, person?
My title is I'm a program manager with the Community Mental Health and Addictions Division, which is a division within the Pima County Health Department.
Okay. So can you explain what are suicide clusters?
Yeah, a suicide cluster essentially you're looking at a a narrow period of time, so say a week or a month, where more suicides have occurred in a community than would usually be expected. And there's not really any explanation to it. It's not due to chance. There's something that unusually is going on, and it's a statistically significant change. So, if we typically had on average, 15 or 16 suicides in a month, and then suddenly the next month we had 25 or 30. That would be an example of a cluster where we would want to investigate that a little bit further.
As far as you know, have we ever had any here?
We do, yeah. I think every community really has those, and the trick is trying to identify, is this just a natural progression that there's really no explanation for it, or is there some kind of environmental factor that is playing a role? So one example in Pima County was back in 2020 when we had the initial stages of the pandemic. The response to the pandemic and the pandemic itself was really traumatic for a lot of folks, and obviously really drastic changes in our local environments, our communities far and wide. We would expect all kinds of disruption when something like that occurs. And we did see, I think March or April of 2020, some suicide clusters that resulted in health alerts and follow up on our end.
What are some signs that people can be looking out for?
Just general signs and symptoms of somebody that might be considering harming themselves. There's a lot, this is sort of a spectrum, right? It starts with somebody feeling, hopeless and empty, and you might hear them, either saying things like, "What's the point in life anymore?" They may not come out directly and say, "Hey, I want to end my life. I want to hurt myself." But it may just start with just those, "Hey, I don't see a point in going on. I feel hopeless." They may start withdrawing from social activities and friends. They'll stop, having, getting satisfaction out of just the daily routines that they would have normally gone through, like not engaging in hobbies or sports. They could start giving away their belongings sort of suddenly with no explanation. And finally, when it gets to sort of, at its peak, most severe level is when somebody is actually saying, "Hey, I want to end my life. I have a plan to do so, and this is how I would do it." And in those cases, that's where somebody needs an immediate intervention, likely inpatient stabilization at a hospital.
In your time of doing this, do you find there are some people when they hear those trigger words, they're not taking the person seriously, and that could have a bad result, obviously?
Yes, there's definitely some truth to that, and every circumstance is a little different. I've talked to folks, and in some cases it's just totally missed. They don't really understand what's being said, or they didn't take it seriously. They thought the person was just kind of making threats or maybe being sarcastic, or they just didn't think they'd follow through. And in other cases, people are afraid to do something. They feel like if I say something, or I'm going to tattletale, or I'm going to tell somebody then this person's going to hate me. They're not going to like me. Or what if what I do somehow has some kind of indirect influence on what they do. Maybe they're going to hurt themselves because I said something. So a lot of it is to do with fear, and really not knowing what the best follow up is when you hear somebody or see somebody in a kind of a desperate situation like that.
What advice do you have for people going through that, and are there resources available?
There's lots of resources. I think advice to folks who are experiencing thoughts of suicide, and advice to people who are supporting or are aware of somebody that's going through that. This message is for both, I think. Number one is, a lot of folks need to understand that these are periods of time where somebody is really experiencing a major crisis, and oftentimes what we know to be true is that within the next day or a week, those thoughts, those feelings start to clear up, and the person is open to getting help. And so the message is, I know you feel hopeless today, but these things can and will improve. And getting the help that you need is important. There's medications out there that can help. There are several crisis counselors and long-term therapists, psychiatrists, psychologists. We have a variety of different resources locally to help people in the long term if they need it for some form of mental illness, whether it's depression or bipolar disorder or schizophrenia. All of those things are treatable, and suicide is preventable. If it's an absolute crisis, whether it's the person themselves or somebody that's caring for them or a witness to a statement, the thing to do is to get that person help immediately and to treat that like you would any other medical emergency. If somebody is having chest pain and you fear that they could be having a heart attack, or somebody's been exposed to extreme heat and they're not responsive, you're going to call 911 right away. That's the same thing with folks that are having thoughts of suicide. We want emergency help immediately, and the best thing to do is to use any of our local crisis lines. So the local 622-6000 number gets people patched in 24/7, 365 to crisis counselors. They can even dispatch mobile crisis teams to the scene to assess the person if it's too hard to get them help or get them to a hospital. Now the national 988 line is also a 24/7, 365 line that is a much simpler. Obviously, that's easy to remember. You can call and ask for help in the event of an emergency there as well. And 911 is always an option still as well. I think if you have a situation where you feel like, hey, if I leave this person alone for 1 minute, I'm afraid that they're going to hurt themselves. That's a 911 call where first responders really need to come out and help this person out and try to convince them to go to a hospital for stabilization. What we want to do is dispel the fear in the people that are making those calls and the folks that need the help. We don't want them to think, hey, this is going to make it worse. People are going to think down on me, or I'm going to get, hospitalized against my will for months at a time. There's a lot of fear associated with this stuff. We want people to normalize this and to know that these are thoughts and feelings that affect a lot of people and they're not alone. And lastly, having a safety plan in place for people who have a form of severe mental illness, or maybe they've had a suicide attempt in the past. Those folks should have plans in place. Again, just like somebody with diabetes or heart disease should have a safety plan. We want them to know, hey, this is the person that you call for support. If they're not available, call one of the crisis lines. And really consider strongly checking yourself into a local hospital. So those are the key steps and the things that I would tell anyone in these situations.
Okay. Sir, I appreciate your time. Something we don't always talk about on the news all the time, but obviously information that needs to get out there for people need to hear it. So I appreciate you. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Yeah. Take care. Appreciate your time.
Bye.